I mean, one of the main things that happens as you get old is you lose your memory. We all say, my memory is not what it was. Well, if you can't remember what it was like, how can you say that, you know?
Please welcome the one, the only, Mr. John Cleese. There you go. And let me get you a microphone. Thank you. It's wonderful to have you here.
Well, it's surprising I'm still alive, really. I mean, I'm 84 and I'm fairly deaf, but I'm not too bad in the right ear, you see. I have to sit this side of you or I can't hear you. And what else? The awful thing about being old is that you feel tired all the time. But you don't know if you're feeling tired because you're tired or because you're old. So you don't know whether to rest or not. It's very confusing. And not only am I deaf, there's all sorts of things that happen. I mean, one of the main things that happens as you get old is you lose your memory. We all say, my memory is not what it was. Well, if you can't remember what it was like, how can you say that, you know? And your sexual drive goes, which is a tremendous release. It's just wonderful. It means you can smile at pretty young ladies now, and they smile back because they know they can run faster than you. And the other thing is, and this is the difficult bit about getting old, is that your nasal hairs go white. And people become obsessed with them. When you're talking to them about something serious, like the tragic death of your mother, they cannot take their eyes off your nasal hairs. They just stare at them endlessly. So you get rid of them by cutting them, but if you trim them, then they start growing faster. And if you try to dye them black, you practically choke to death with the water. So you have to grow the nasal hairs very, very long so that you can comb them down into the top of your moustache. And then you forget that you don't have a moustache. And you have these nasal hairs that have gone right. You look like some strange Mandarin emperor. Only sort of soggy with it. So this is the problem about being old. There are many advantages to it. For a start, you go deaf, which is fantastic. Oh, it's so great being deaf because first of all, there's no loud bangs. And secondly, what you find when you go completely deaf is that most of the things that people used to say to you weren't worth listening to anyway. So you don't have to bother with them anymore. And if you're sitting next to somebody very, very dim and boring at dinner, you only have to say to them, I'm so sorry, could you repeat that just one more time? 4 times, and they never speak to you again. You just got rid of them. So there's a lot of advantages to getting old. And one of them is the climate control or global warming is no longer a problem for people of my age. You know, I mean, basically, fuck you all. You know, I'll be gone. I'm out of there. How are you?
Very good.
Very good.
So John Cleese.
Thank you.
What an absolute pleasure it is to have you here. I just got to ask a couple questions. I want to get to some audience stuff. And if you tell me to repeat
it, the ruder the better.
Okay. And if you tell me to repeat them 4 times, I'll know that it's not a great question. So it's been about 50 years since Monty Python, and there's been no other comedy troupe of that magnitude. Oh. Why do you never think there was never anything like Monty Python? We're talking.
Well, I think there was stuff like Monty Python in England always, because even in the Victorian era, which was the era when they all wore those stovepipe hats and dressed in black and dark grey, and everything was very, very formal. And I'm not being funny now. Do you know they were so sexually inhibited that they sometimes used to cover the legs of chairs and tables and pianos so that the men wouldn't become aroused by the sight of the naked wood. That's how crazy it was in Victorian times, but we always had people like Edward Lear writing silly verses. You know, The Owl and the Pussycat comes out in the middle of it's a sweet little story, comes out in the middle of the Victorian era. And we've always had a sort of silly comedy. I mean, back in the 1700s, Dean Swift, who was a great satirist, he was dealing with two problems: the fact that there wasn't enough to eat and the fact there was an overpopulation. And he wrote a book saying that the way to solve this was just to eat babies. And this was quite a popular, because the British always had a strong sense of irony. But when you come to America, you're not as silly as we are. Your humor isn't as silly. You have to go back a long time to find silly. You know, do you guys know about the Marx Brothers?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
You know.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but you say, of course. You see, younger people don't. I was talking to two producers yesterday. One of them had been lecturing at a film school, and he mentioned the name Jack Benny. And he said, how many of you know who Jack Benny was? And nobody put their hand up. You see, the feeling, the disillusionment among young people is always that what is interesting is the latest thing. The comedy, latest comedy is what's interesting in comedy. The answer is no, because 90% of the output each year is pretty terrible. But if you go back in history and you start watching at the great stuff from history, I was on a cruise, and one of the guys who was lecturing on the cruise had written a biography of Sid Caesar, of the show of shows, which was what, the 30s? I mean, sorry, the 50s?
50s.
Yeah, 40s and 50s, with Sid Caesar, which had the most extraordinary list of people in the writer's room, like Mel Brooks.
Buck Henry.
Buck Henry, that's right. And Woody Allen. He was a writer for Sid Caesar. And I saw these two sketches by Sid Caesar that were done in about 1954, and they were funnier than anything that I've seen in the last couple of years. So there's all this wonderful old comedy material. Go back to Laurel and Hardy. Really very, very funny. Charlie Chaplin, right? Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields. These people were the funniest people there ever were, and they were extraordinarily skilled because most of them came from the stage. So the people like the two Brits in there were Charlie Chaplin and Laurel from Laurel and Hardy. And these guys had grown up in the music halls, which was our equivalent to your vaudevilles, and they could do all kind of falls and tricks. Do you see what I mean? They were incredibly physically skilled in a way that I think only Jim Carrey is. You can't give many actors very funny physical stuff to do because they're not skillful enough to do it. In those days, they were astonishing. I don't know if you've ever watched, for example, there's a dance on roller skates that Charlie Chaplin does in modern days, and it's absolutely breathtaking. It's not only funny, it's so skilled. When he's got a blindfold on, he skates right next to a drop. I don't know how he does it, but they didn't fake it in those days because they didn't have visual effects. So what I'm saying is, for any of you who want to see the top-class comedy, go back into the past and even go look at some of the English comedy from the 60s and 70s, because it's no good anymore. Because the people who took the BBC over were basically bureaucrats. And bureaucrats want to control everything. They want to be in control of everything. It's like businessmen. They want to be in control of everything. And many years ago, I always carried a lot of tension in my body. I think it was because I had a slightly unpredictable mother. And I've always carried physical tension. So I go and I have chiropractic or I have osteopathy. And what the osteopaths and the chiropractors will always tell you is that the hardest people to treat are businessmen, because they're trying to control everything. And the easiest people to treat are creative artists, because they're used to just letting go and letting something happen without trying to control it. And if you put people who have to be in control in front of creative people, you get nothing at all. Now, you see, this stuff, what I'm telling you, I promise you, is completely true, and you will hardly hear it anywhere. It's why there's so much absolutely terrible films and television being made now. There's very good drama, but there's very little top-class comedy. And where there is, it's because in comedy, they used to treat the comedy writers in films so badly that they all left Hollywood and started working for the television series. And because they were writers, they were bright people. And they finished up becoming producers. And because they were producers, they knew how to nurture the talent. So it's all very paradoxical, but I think if you're interested in why some television works and why it doesn't other, it's largely because most of the people in charge, except for the ones who've been writers, most of the people in charge don't know what they're doing. But that wouldn't matter. But they don't know that they don't know what they're doing. And therefore, they have lots and lots of confidence in their ability to be fucking stupid all the time. And that's why anyone who goes into our business goes crazy, because too many people around who don't know that they don't know what they're doing. Often, and I did a very interesting thing with my daughter who understands computers. We heard all this stuff recently about AI, artificial intelligence. So my daughter went to one of the chat boxes and asked the intelligent AI chat box, which is better for replacing people in the film business? Is it better to replace the creatives with AI, or is it better to replace the executives? And the chat box said, well, actually, most of the things executives do are much better replicated by AI, and most of the things that creative people do aren't well replicated by AI. So really, instead of the executives taking all the creative people and replacing them with AI, we should keep the creatives and replace all the business executives. Because
great idea.
It's good, isn't it?
Certainly.
So that was a bit long, but I think this audience is interested in that kind of stuff. Yeah,
we're just so happy you're here.
And that's nice of you.
I got to ask you, when did you first realize you were funny?
I think I was about 10, and I'd been, during the war, we'd moved all the time. You see, I was born in a little town in Western called Weston-super-Mare, and it was in the southwest of England, and it was very, very, very quiet and sleepy and safe and not terribly interesting. And then in 1941, the Germans bombed it. And the Westonians were rather pleased that they had been bombed, because it made them feel more important. There's sort of a sense of significance that if the Germans had bothered to waste bombs on us, obviously we're more important than we thought, you see. And my father had been in the First World War for 3.5 years, had had enough of loud bangs. And so within 24 hours of the Germans bombing in Weston, I said, Dad, why are the Germans bombing Weston? And he said, I think it's to show that they do have a sense of humor. Because he said the amount of value of anything that would be destroyed by a German bomb would be less than the value of the bomb that destroyed it. You see what I mean? So that every time they dropped a bomb on Weston, they were losing the economic war. So Dad was up and off, jumped in his car and drove off and found a little farm 15 miles outside the town where I was born, and we grew up on farms. We kept moving from farm to farm, so I had a lot of changes when I was young, and that meant that I didn't have chance to to form friendships with other boys, because I was always forming a friendship and then leaving and going to the next place. So when I went to school, I was very socially awkward, and I was also ridiculously tall. So I got teased a lot, and I just discovered that I could make people laugh. And if you can make people laugh, people like you. It doesn't matter if you play awful characters like Basil Fawlty or like W.C. Fields. You play these awful, awful people. But if you make people laugh, they have affection for you. So I think I discovered early on that if you can make people laugh, then they tend to feel friendly towards you.
And when did you first realize you were a comic genius?
Never, because I have always understood I've had a huge advantage over a lot of other comedians, is that I've realized it's much more difficult than they think. And if people think that things are easy, they don't work so hard at them. And I've always said that my success is just due to the fact that, for example, when I was writing Fawlty Towers, do some of you know Fawlty Towers?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. It's a sitcom that was recently voted the best BBC sitcom ever. And it's set in a hotel, and I wrote it with my first wife, Connie Booth. And what I discovered there was that the director, again, the producer didn't know what he was talking about, because he actually commissioned this series to do in a hotel. And when we did the first episode, the first thing he said was, "John, you'll have to get them out of the hotel more." Completely wrong. And it's another example of the fact that even the best people in charge don't really know what they're doing. I lost track of where I was. Where was I?
There. We were talking, actually, if you don't mind changing gears, because you just answered that question.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. You and Graham Chapman were writing partners. How did that come about, and what was your method of writing with him?
It's very strange, because when Graham and I went to audition for the Footlights, which was the Cambridge Footlights, was the equivalent to the Harvard Hasty Pudding Club. And we went to audition for something in our first year, and we weren't any good and we didn't get it. But we met afterwards, and the funny thing was I didn't particularly like him. Now, the next thing I remember is in our second year, we went and we discovered that all the older people had left, and we'd all been left in positions to run the Footlights Club, despite the fact we had no idea what we were doing or what we were supposed to do. So Graham and I started to write together, and we had a huge empathy together when we were laughing. And the other thing I found about Graham was that when you start as a young writer, you really don't know whether what you're coming up with is going to make the audience laugh. And what I discovered with Graham was that if he laughed, then the audience was going to laugh. He was like a litmus test, which was incredibly helpful, gave me confidence all the time that if he said so, yeah, he said it. I did a sketch once which I just didn't think was very funny, and it's called The Cheese Shop. Do you know? It's a guy goes into a cheese shop and he asks for cheese, and they don't have any of the cheeses he asks for. He asks altogether for about 45 different cheeses, and they always say things like, "No, we never have that on a Tuesday," or "The cat ate it," or "We know, there's no call for it round here." When he asks, "Do they have any cheddar?" he says, "There's no call for cheddar around here." And this sketch, we were going on and on writing it, and I kept saying to Graham, "Is this funny?" And Graham would puff on his pipe and say, "It's funny." And I'd write down another 10 cheeses and another 10 reasons why that shop didn't have them, and then say, "Graham, are you quite sure this is funny?" And Graham said, "Yes, it's funny." And in the end, when I read it out, there was no laughter at all for about the first 30 seconds. And I thought, oh, Christ, this is embarrassing. Because even when you're reading stuff out to the other Pythons, you still want them to laugh at. And suddenly, Michael Palin started to giggle. And it got worse. He couldn't stop giggling. He started laughing. And then he started howling. And he actually fell off his chair onto the floor. I'd never seen anyone do that. He overbalanced onto the floor and lay on the floor, holding his sides, unable to stop laughing. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment. But that was when I blessed Graham Chapman for always knowing whether people were going to laugh or not. Again, I've lost track because I'm just looking around the faces here and trying to see who I know.
No, we're all good. I got one more question for you, and then we're going to get some from the audience.
Sure.
And I got to ask you, you're always working. Always working. What do you do for your spare time? Do you do anything for fun?
I do a lot, quite a lot of reading and spending time with friends. But the strange thing is now I've almost stopped watching television. I don't go to the cinema, and a lot of older people have almost stopped going to the cinema. Why? I think mainly because the films they're making are of no interest to me because I'm an older person. And most of the films that are successful in the cinema now are aimed at a younger audience, which simply wasn't the case when I was growing up. So I think that's part of it. But it's also because I've never earned a great deal of money. Everyone assumes that I'm very, very rich because if I worked in America, I would be. You know, if you've been in Friends or something like that. But I never earned a great deal of money. I mean, it might amuse you to know that when I did my first Fawlty Towers, I got for writing 6 shows and performing 6 shows, I got £1,000 a show. It's not a lot of money, you know. When I started Monty Python, I got £240 an episode as a performer. £240. I mean, it's not, this is BBC. My joke used to be I do a lot of work for charity, most of it for the BBC. You know? And so I never accumulated large quantities of money. And then I made the mistake of marrying my third American. And she took me for 20 million, so that's why I'm still working. But I've got a couple of very nice projects at the moment. One I dearly love, and that is that I'm adapting Life of Brian, which I think is our best film. So I'm adapting Life of Brian for the stage in the West End next year, and we've got a very good script. I will tell you, because there's no journalist here, I will tell you that one of the things we do not crucify Brian at the end. Erik Idle's very disappointed. He thinks we should, but he's already used the song in Spamalot, right? So do we want to end every Python show by having Brightside? And I've changed it. He now lives, Brian, at the end. And I've got a very naughty ending where Pontius Pilate actually goes out and apologizes to the crowd for crucifying Jesus Christ. And he says all sorts of things that, like American politicians says, let's be frank about this, mistakes were made. Yeah. And hindsight is always 20/20. I think it's going to be quite wonderful.
I think so too.
And then we discover, don't tell anyone this, that Brian is Pontius Pilate's son. Because Pontius was in Judea 20, 30 years before and had a fling with the Virgin Mandy. So I messed around with it completely because I don't see any point in doing exactly the same thing that's already been done. And, you know, I remember going to see Producers, which I thought was one of the great comedy films, and I was very disappointed by the stage play because it was the same stuff. And I thought, I don't want to watch the same stuff. The other thing I've been doing is writing with my dear daughter, who's very, very smart writer. She's a stand-up comedian called Camilla Cleese, and you will see her on YouTube. She's very naughty. She says things like she's all for women's rights. She says especially the right to stay at home and not work. She's very, very funny. And she and I have been working for ages on Fish Called Wanda. And we had a lovely read-through in LA about 3 months ago, and we got Andy Carl, who I think is unbelievably fine as a performer. He actually came to the table read. I know they flew him in from New York, and I'm hoping he'll play Otto. And we had a very, very successful table read of the first act, and we met last week on the second act, and that's in very, very good shape because it's got all the killing of the dogs and a lot of very, very, what's the word, very hilarious things that break people up. It's very funny what we can get away with on Monty Python. And you see, don't forget, in Fish Called Wanda, everybody loved the Michael Palin character who was trying to kill an old woman. Right, and instead we killed 3 of his dogs, her dogs, you know, and then she finally, when she sees the third one is dead, she has a heart attack, so he succeeds the long way around. But what is so fascinating is that gets the biggest laugh in the movie. It's like the Black Knight. The Black Knight gets the biggest laughs of any scene in the Holy Grail. And it's the scene where a man has his arms and legs chopped off.
Yeah. Well,
let's try to get through as many of these as we can.
Yeah, let's try and fire through some questions.
John, I love you, man. So this keeps me up at night. If you had to pick one member of Monty Python to fight, who would you most easily be able to take down, and what kind of fruit would you use?
He said, what kind of fruit would you use?
I'm always very fond of the moment when we come back to Mr. Creosote, the very, very fat man in the restaurant. You remember, and he has the tail of a pineapple in his mouth. I mean, it's a man who's eaten his whole way through a pineapple and has only got the sticky out bits at the end. I don't know who I'd take down. I think I'd take Erik down. I think he's made too much money in recent years, and I don't think any of us are very pleased about that. All right.
Awesome.
Okay, Mr. Cleese, it's so wonderful to see you. What was the inspiration for the Black Knight scene?
Oh, it's a very interesting story. It's very rare that something that happened in reality became Monty Python material, but I had heard when I was a boy at school, I was about 15, and I had a teacher called Jumper G who taught us English. And he didn't bother to teach us English. He just told us great stories. We had wonderful conversations, but he didn't bother to teach us English at all, because as he pointed out at one point, we all spoke it fluently anyway, so why were we trying to learn it? And he told us a story about a banquet that had happened in ancient Rome. And this is an extraordinary story, because after the banquet, they had sort of cabaret, and sometimes they had singing and dancing. But the Romans loved wrestling. On this particular occasion, the rich aristocrat who gave the banquet, they cleared the middle of the room, and 2 wrestlers came, 2 of the best-known wrestlers in Rome, and they came and with a referee, and they cleared an area in the middle of the room, and they started to wrestle. And, excuse me again. When they started to wrestle, they started that Greco-Roman style where they get very entwined with each other, and they were sort of there and fighting for position and straining to try and get the upper hand, and suddenly there was a loud crack, and one guy's arm had broken under the pressure. And so he obviously was terrible pains. The referee stopped it immediately and disentangled them and sent him off to the doctor to get his arm set. And they said to the other one, "You won," and the other one was dead. Now, I thought that was terribly funny. Here's this guy won the fight, and he'll never know that he won it. And I told Graham Chapman that story one day while we were making coffee and sorting socks and doing all the things that writers do to avoid starting work. And Graham and I sat down and wrote the Black Knight, because Jumper G, my teacher, said this only shows that if you don't give up, you can't be beaten. Well, I thought that was bullshit when I was 15, but that I told him that story, and that gave us the impetus, because it's an extraordinary thought that scene in Holy Grail gets more laughter than any other scene, and it's about a man having his arms and legs chopped off. So how on earth can that be funny? I mean, when I was talking about the dogs in Fish Called Wanda, where 3 dogs are killed, I wondered for ages about why did we get away with killing those dogs, and it's a very simple answer. It's because the dogs were Yorkshire Terriers. Everybody knows they're not proper dogs. Stupid little yapping, hairy fucking mosquitoes. If we had been killing German shepherds, I would not be here today to tell the tale. So it's a very interesting thing how you can get away with things. I mean, a wonderful story that I was told about W.C. Fields, who I think was a great comedian. I'm sorry, I've got a tickle. Somebody said to him, "What do you mean, Bill, you can make anything funny? Can you make a blind person funny?" And Fields did. He wrote a movie, and I've forgotten its name, but he was the proprietor of a shop that sells nothing but glass. Right? It's a gift. Thank you. And a blind man comes into his shop with a stick and destroys the shop. Fields is trying to get him out of the shop, but he breaks everything in the shop with him and his white stick, right? And in the end, Field gets him out, turns around, and there's desolation. It's Hiroshima. Everything in the shop is destroyed. So then you cut a bit of time, and he's got the shop up again, and he's got all this glass in the right place, and it's all been cleaned up, and the blind man comes in again. And he takes him by the arm, and he leads him out of the shop, and across the road, and halfway across the road, he just leaves him there with the dog, with the cars going backwards and forwards. And you can laugh at him because he's transformed the blind person into a threat. Do you see what I mean? He's now a threat. So if you know how to play these tricks, you can get away with the most extraordinary black humor, but you always got to realize that a lot of people won't get it, because I'm sorry to say that the literal-minded are always with us, and they inhabit the woke community in large numbers. And I'll give you an example of this kind of literal thinking. There's a very good charity called Oxfam, and they produced a 93-page pamphlet recently, not instructing, but recommending that the people who work for Oxfam avoided saying certain things. And one of the things they recommended was to say, if you support someone, don't say that you stand with them, because it might upset people who are unable to stand. How do you discuss anything with somebody like that? It's impossible. And you have to accept that there are people, the literal-minded, who are playing with a few cards short of a full deck. And we must make sure that we don't let people who have no sense of humor dictate what people who do have a sense of humor are allowed to laugh at. Otherwise...
We got time for just 2 more questions. We just got time for two more questions. You're going to be headed back to your table to sign and hang out?
Unfortunately, but I'd much rather stay here and talk to the audience.
This would be awesome.
Well, signing...
Thank you, Mr. Cleese.
Fine for 3 hours, but I've done enough. So I think I'll just stay here and do another hour and a half with you.
Cool, I'm in.
So you're in? Okay. So we just ignore all those people who get very upset over there. because they're not making money, so fuck them. Right?
All right. Well, I gotta leave after this to go make money at my job. Anyway, you talk about the reason those 3 adaptations of Fawlty Towers never worked in America was because the producers and executives didn't listen to you. What did you tell these executives? Was there any way that Fawlty Towers could have worked in America?
Well, that's several bits to answer to that. The first thing is, on all 3 occasions, I said to them, how can I help? And on all 3 occasions, they said, we don't need your help. Thank you very much. We know exactly how to do this. And in all 3 cases, it was a total disaster. I mean, all 3 attempts to make an American Fawlty Towers failed. But to give you some idea of the sort of quality of the executives we were dealing with, I heard about a third of the attempts. I was at a weekend, a place I used to go at the weekends was owned by the fellow who put up the first money for the Monty Python films. And some people from America were staying with him because he was American, and they said, oh, we bought the rights for Fawlty Towers. And I said, really? And I thought, woo, cha-ching, cha-ching, you know. And I said, but do you think Americans are ever really going to understand a family hotel when everybody stays in these enormous chains of hotels? They said, no, it doesn't worry us at all. We've only made one change, just one. And I said, what's that? And they said, we've written Basil out. They took Fawlty Towers. I mean, that is like writing Hamlet out of an adaptation of Hamlet. Can you imagine that anyone could have been stupid enough? So they gave all of Basil's lines to B. Arthur, and they gave her Sybil's lines too. So it was a disaster. And anybody could see it would be a disaster. And it's people who have no idea, they have no idea what they're doing. And they're around in large numbers. It's much, much more desperate. I have a speech called Why There Is No Hope, which is all about the fact that very few people know what they're doing, and most people have absolutely no idea what they are talking about 100% of the time. And that's what I would tell all young people. Very few of these people who pretend they know what they're doing do.
Let's squeeze in one more. I would love this to go on forever, but we just have time for one more
I told
question.
you it is going to go on forever. Now ask the next question, please.
Mr. Cleese, quite an honor. My name is Brooke, which is totally irrelevant. In your book on creativity, you wrote, when you're being creative, there's no such thing as a mistake.
Correct.
Have you ever been in a room with someone that made you say, oh, fuck, I wish I wouldn't have written that?
It's a very interesting question. I suppose once or 2 times with Terry Jones in Python, but otherwise almost never. Because I wrote a book on creativity, and if you're interested in creativity, please allow me to recommend it. It has been enormously well received by writers. The last person who went crazy about it was Donna Tartt, who's got, quite a reputation. It costs about $7, I think, and it takes you less than an hour to read, and it's all the basic things about creativity, none of which you will ever have heard of from your teachers at school, because it's all to do with the greatest ideas come not from the logical part of your brain, but from the less logical part of your brain. And I could go into this because I want to try and persuade people to think more like this, but there's no question that people with a very, very fine, logical, what's the right word? Very articulate verbally, and as I say, extremely good with tight verbal logic. There's no way that those people are ever going to produce anything creative. You see, the people who produce the creative stuff, are the people who somehow can connect with their unconscious, which is this extraordinary computer that we have within us if we know how to work with it. But the thing is, you can't tell your unconscious what to do. You just have to form a friendship with it and find a way of letting it prompt you into ideas. Because when you have ideas, at the time that you have them, you mustn't be too critical of them. In fact, you shouldn't be critical at all. You should just say, oh, that's interesting, no matter how bad an idea, and you should just follow it. Now, if you follow it after a time, you say, well, we don't think that's going anywhere, that isn't going to land, so maybe it was a mistake. But we had to do the discussion to discover it was a mistake. And if you have people around who are much too critical at the start, nothing creative will ever happen. You have to have people around who understand that creativity can't be done on demand. There's a famous story about Sam Goldwyn at MGM, and he had this large block, which was where the writers always used to work, which is kind of funny because it was called the writer's block. Yes, good joke. And what happened was they discovered that Sam was always worried that the writers weren't working hard enough. And this is in the old days when they had noisy typewriters. So the writers stationed some young guy on the corner of the balcony to see when Sam would come along, Sam Goldwyn would come along sometimes to see if there was a lot of noise coming from the typewriters. So when they sent the word out, they shouted out, hey, Sam's coming. They all pulled the sheet out of the typewriter, put another sheet in, and just typed any old rubbish for about 4 minutes. And Sam Goldwyn would think, oh, good, they're working hard. And then he would go away, and they'd take the sheet out, throw it away, put the other sheet back in, and go on thinking. Because it's very hard for some people to think that anybody is working hard when they're thinking. I suppose I better do this.
No, I got an idea. Yeah. Everybody here is going to go to your table.
Oh,
and we're going to continue. So that's what's going to happen. Everybody's going to hang out at your table, and that's...
And I shall refuse to sign autographs, but I'm happy to go on answering questions.
There you go. Give it up. What a treasure, Mr. John Cleese! Oh, come on. You can do better than that. Fabulous.
I've decided not to go.
There you go. Keep it going. He's still in the room. He's got a long walk. Make it a good one. Headed back to his table to talk to all of you and do all kinds of crazy things. Ladies and gentlemen, once more for Mr. John Cleese. Amazing.
This is Erica Harlicker-Stone, and you're watching Fandom Spotlight. Yay! Make sure to like and subscribe. Do it right now. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. I don't know why you aren't doing it. Seriously, I'm gonna keep saying it until you do it. Ugh. Okay, thank you. Yay! Remember to have fun and follow your fandom. Bye!